Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. Now this is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. Remember, you can be part of this conversation on our Twitter handle at SA Media Monitor. You can also post using SABC Media Monitor, hashtag SABC Media Monitor. I'm Peter Ndoro, and this is what's coming up on the show today. The South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, has launched a media ethics and credibility inquiry this past week, and this is to probe allegations that some media houses may have been captured by politicians as well as corporate companies. We'll be asking why now and just how bad could things be. The media industry continues to be hit by sizeable retrenchments, declines in revenues, and also the safety of journalists is an increasing concern. We'll be unpacking these and other findings in the latest Wits Journalism State of the Newsroom report. Well, these are just some of the stories that we'll be tackling on the show. But first, let's take a look at the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning, which we'll be discussing in the program a little bit later on in detail. So let's start with the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Times' headline takes us to Cape Town, where the city apparently risks becoming the world's most dangerous city if the police fails to curb the surge in gangland killings. In just 4 months, for example, the city has had 1,280 suspected murders. Now, part of the problem also is police infighting. The city press, that's leading with what they believe is President Ramaphosa gearing up for a war with Public Protector Busisiwe Mkhwebane over a 500,000 rand donation made to his ANC presidential campaign by the former CEO of the controversial services company Bosasa. The paper alleges that the president is already preparing for a negative finding by the Public Protector. The Sunday Independent lead story makes claims of an ANC plot to destroy the African Transformation Movement Party, and this was ahead of the May 8 elections. And the paper says that it has a 3-hour-long audio recording exposing senior ANC leaders, including Fikile Mbalula, paying ATM activists 40,000 rand each to destabilize the ATM from within. The Sunday Tribune, the front page story there is about the eThekwini municipality's 3 billion rand Go Durban bus project, which is leaking money at the moment with no transport solution in sight yet, and how taxi bosses are vowing to halt the project until disputes have been resolved and compensation worked out. The Weekend Argus's top story is pointing to an urgent probe ordered by the Police Minister Bheki Cele in the Western Cape to investigate allegations of rivalry between the Major Offences Reaction Team and the province's anti-gang unit as gang wars spiral out of control, as we saw on the front page of the Sunday Times. All right, okay, so quite a lot to get through, and as usual we have guest editors in the studio to help us unpack these stories and make sense of some of them. And our guest editors this morning, I'd like to welcome SABC Economics editor Thandeka Qobule, and also Alan Finlay, who's edited the Wits State of the Newsroom report. To both of you, a very good morning. Give us a wave.
Good morning, Peter.
There we go. All right, so now let's start with our top story now. You may remember last week we spoke about research showing that more than half of South Africans had lost trust in the media. We tried to explore some of the reasons why. Well, this past week, the National Editors Forum, SANEF, launched its media ethics and credibility inquiry. It'll be chaired by Judge Kathy Satchwell, and the question is, I guess, what is its aim and what are they hoping it will do? Well, let's find out now from SANEF's Executive Director, Kate Skinner, who joins me via Skype. Kate, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the program. Always great to talk to you. So what are we having, a state capture inquiry for the media?
Well, no. We want to do something slightly different. We want to look at problems in the media in terms of credibility and ethics issues and loss of trust in terms of audiences. But it's not going to be something where we pinpoint particular individuals or particular media entities. More what we're trying to do is to look at the overall trends. And a very specific purpose is to look at how do we fix things. How do we improve ethical codes? How do we improve ethical practices? What are the best practices in South Africa? What are the best practices internationally? And how can we adopt those as an industry? And the ultimate purpose is to have a media industry conference within a year and to look at the recommendations that come out and to basically adopt an action plan in terms of ensuring that we have, more ethical media industry.
So what informed this? And there must have been some alarm bells that were rung, and you thought, guys, we need to really look at this, that this could be a problem. What had you noted?
Yes, so there were a number of things. So we, a number of our own members actually asked us to do this, and there were various things that had happened. I mean, last year, obviously, there were a lot of issues around the Sunday Times, the issues around the Rogue Unit, some of those stories, but also there was the issue of, the Zono Commission and Bosasa claiming that they were actually paying journalists. And so it was those kinds of issues, including members of the public claiming that certain journalists had been captured and were putting forward particular views which were not views of not a 360-degree view of what was happening. And so it was various people, various things that were happening that we started to say, well, let's look at this issue, let's look at it industry-wide, and let's particularly look at what we can do about it.
All right, so who are you going to be talking to over this period of time?
So a lot of people. We are going to be talking to all the media owners. We're going to be talking to journalists, editors, and also members of the public. So any member of the public that wants to put forward a submission can actually, make a submission available to us. And further to that, we're also going to be looking at a number of different stakeholders. So we are going to be asking, the business community through Business Leadership South Africa. We're also going to be, talking to the unions, talking to, a number of different sectors, the education sector, a whole government, political parties, and basically saying to them, if you feel that there are unethical practices, if you feel that journalists have been captured, please put forward submissions. The panel and researchers will have a look at that and then come up with recommendations. So it will be proactive, but also we are asking, members of the public and different sectors to actually submit, their thoughts, put forward submissions, and actually send it to a particular email address, which is panel@mediainquiry.co.za.
All right, so you've called it credibility and ethics. What if you find during this inquiry actually that maybe some criminal activity has taken place where bribes have been paid and things like that? Do you escalate it?
Yeah, I mean, those kind of issues will have to be dealt with by the panel. They will have to decide what to do with it. And if there is criminal activity, my understanding would be that they would have to report that. But it would be, those are the things that the panel would have to make a final decision on.
All right, so, ethics is an interesting word because it suggests that you haven't done anything wrong by law, but perhaps behavior that we don't quite like. How do you decide what's ethical and what's not ethical in journalism? Is there a book or a code that's been written, or is this something perhaps that's going to come out as a result of this inquiry?
Yes, so good question. I mean, there are a number of codes. So there's the code at the Press Council, the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa has a code. So there are a number of codes that exist. But what we're wanting to look at it, do those codes actually work? Could they be strengthened? But also beyond the codes, I mean, there are a number of ethical practices that are there in the different media houses, different media entities, adhere to different codes. So we would be looking at those, but particularly, as I say, looking at ways to strengthen them, ways to ensure that ethical practices actually are prioritized and again strengthened.
All right, Kate, thanks very much indeed. Hopefully we can catch up with you at some time during the course of these inquiries just to see how things are going and perhaps encourage the public and other players to come through. But thanks so much indeed for this first chat around this issue. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, okay, so that's Executive Director Kate Skinner speaking to us on Skype, talking about this inquiry that's going to be taking place. Well, let's have this discussion now with my guest editors. So thank you both for joining us on such an early Sunday morning. It's chilly, isn't it? But good to have you.
Pleasure.
All right, so we've heard Kate, we've had this inquiry that's been set up, and I suppose it's one that's long overdue, Tandek.
Yes, there are two aspects to it. First, there's the global disregard and declining confidence in the media. Then there is the aspect that the media itself has a broken business model. It's almost an industrial era business model, which is no longer yielding profits and so on. And then you're seeing the closing down of various media houses and the thinning out of newsrooms. And that has an effect on many other things, including ethics. Then you have the South African specific situation where you had a lot of unethical practices, a lot of questionable political allegiances and so on, and you had the capture phenomenon. So I see it as those three things impacting the public confidence in the media and showing declining confidence in the media, and it shows that journalists are no longer trusted. But what I saw in some of that is that there were 10,000 journalists not so long ago. Now we're sitting at 5,000 journalists. And
so the thing about our conversations today, they're going to overlap a little bit with the one that we're going to have with you later on with the State of the Newsroom report that you came up with. But let's try and leave some of those specific issues like retrenchments and so on and so forth to a later discussion. What I want to talk about really here is it's the behavior of the journalists, the media houses themselves, and whether they'd been letting down the public to survive, I guess. And I wonder if even in the research that you were doing for your State of the Newsroom, did you get a sense that we were crossing the line more and more over time in terms of ethical behavior as a journalist?
Yeah, I mean, what occurs to me more and more is that people look at issues such as profitability of the media. We talk about retrenchments, we talk about where's the money going to come from, but I think we need to take a step back and look at journalist responsibility. And my feeling is that the media will find a profitability niche if they look at it that way. I mean, for 10 years ago or more, the editors became media managers, and already that divide got blurred, and then people were talking about, it's the job of the editor to make money too. I think we need to go back to a clearer division between selling newspapers and doing good journalism. And I think that kind of structure will improve a journalist ethics, because now an editor is looking where he needs to look, which is at the newsroom.
All right. Tandega, you had to defend allegations against you recently, and I wonder if this isn't part of the problem, where it's quite easy for someone who's got an agenda just to say, oh, Tandega is part of Stratcom, oh, Alan is feeding into white monopoly capital agenda, that the public now start to question the work of journalists.
Yes, and it's very important that we deal with the whole phenomenon of fake news. Somebody, as happened with us as the SABC 8, Soma created a fictitious email and claimed that it was from a greasy, and controls failed again at the Sunday Times. and they couldn't verify. And for example, they couldn't even produce the basics, which is a proof of payment. And they went for the story, and they flaunted every journalistic procedure and every piece of ethics that's in the codes that Kate was speaking about. And there they went merrily publishing. And some journalists then took it upon themselves to retweet and repeat these salacious and false, fake and defamatory things. So people with agendas can create fake news and further destroy credible journalists like my colleagues in the SABC 8. It was crazy. And the inquiry is meant to look at things like that, but beyond that, the State Capture Commission itself will be sitting down and looking at some of what happened, as well as some of the stuff involving journalism, as well as the SABC itself.
So from where you were sitting and your experiences, do you think that the public broadcaster at one time was captured?
I think it was captured. I think there was a lot of political interference from a certain group, and I think that will come through in the more credible reports of different inquiries that took place. I think it'll come through, and will be my position will be vindicated at the State Capture Commission, which is that the public broadcaster was indeed captured and put to use by certain very dark forces in our country, and that the journalism and the quality of journalism and journalism ethics were affected by that project. And I think that will come through very strongly in the State Capture Commission, if not in the Kathleen Setchell inquiry.
Right. And then perhaps the final question on this issue to you. I'm going to relate a story that happened to me. You know, I was setting up an interview, and this guy then said, look, he pitched the story, and I was going to do the interview anyway. And then he says, and then we will thank you. And I said, what do you mean? And he laughed, and he says, you know what we mean. We'll thank you afterwards. Yeah. I have spoken to you and another person. So it sounded as if this other person may have already taken money, I don't know, to do this interview. And I'm just wondering, in the research that you've done, we hear about these brown envelopes and so on and so forth. Is this something that is still out there?
Apparently, yes. I mean, we took our cue. We do have a section in State of the Newsroom on media freedoms, in which we include media ethics, because we understand media ethics being part of media freedoms, a responsibility of the journalists. And we took our cue from SANEF, so around that, because we build it up using SANEF media statements, and we review them and categorize them. So yeah, apparently it's going on.
It's quite crazy, man. All right, listen, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll unpack the report actually in greater detail, because there's a number of other issues there. Don't forget to tweet us at SA Media Monitor, and also hashtag SABC Media Monitor. We want to get your thoughts. Have you seen this happening? Is it something that you've observed? Let us know. We'll be back right after this.
We're explorers. We always have been, endlessly curious, always looking for answers, for new frontiers, for new stories. Because that is who we are. From script to screen, from yelling action to taking you on a journey. Radio producers, script writers, on-air presenters, news reporters, sports analysts. We spend late nights creating captivating storylines and earlier mornings keeping you informed, educated, and entertained. For us, it's not a job, it's a calling. We do this and more because you do your part. SABC TV licenses, made possible by you.
Visuals, they're busy shooting.
We drove around this.
Welcome back. You're still watching SABC News Media Monitor, and we focus now on a number of matters that perhaps give us a sense of whether the news industry is where it is at the moment. We've just discussed concerns around media ethics and credibility, but are there other issues that are threatening journalism as we know it? Well, a recent Wits University journalism project titled State of the Newsroom Report 2018 has revealed a number of concerns, with the researcher and editor of the report saying that it points to real shifts in the industry, suggesting an ongoing weakening of what we think of as the traditional newsroom. Well, let's hear from that researcher and editor, Alan Finlay. Thanks very much for joining us. This sounds like a mammoth project to look at, and over time, I guess, this Wits Journalism Report has seen a number of changes. What does 2018 report tell us in the main?
Well, the big issues, of course, is that the print circulation of newspapers continues to decline. I mean, it's quite stunning. If you look over 3 years, we're looking at about a 20% drop, average drop between for the dailies, weeklies, and weekends. It's significant, and some dropped as much as 40%. Wow. Radio still remains strong, and community radio is actually, the top community stations are starting to challenge prominent commercial stations such as YFM. So the shifts are happening in radio, but in different ways. But of course, the retrenchments are the big thing. I mean, they've been going on for the last 10 years, and now we see this year we're going to be reporting again on retrenchments, and I mean that results in an increased vulnerability for journalists in the newsroom. Are they going to get their next paycheck? Who's next? And as well as on their job, which is a different issue. So it's that, together with the background of the media diet changing. People are accessing news in different ways. Okay, so a lot of things are shifting, the sands are shifting. I'm just wondering, in fact, let's start with the retrenchments. Sure. And I'm going to bring you in just now, Thandeka. Let's start with the retrenchments. What is causing that? What's going on? Is it they're just not making money? I mean, what we know for sure is that advertising revenue is going up over time. Right. Is it just not going to the right places? Well, it seems so. Certainly when it comes to print, they're struggling to get the advertising they need. Online too, actually. Facebook and Google are sucking up a lot of the online revenue. So the advertising is the one thing. The issue is that there is a sense, I think, that perhaps newsrooms might have got too big. Yeah. So there might have been a natural attrition that needed to happen, but at the moment, it does appear that you have your operations managers making the decisions. At which point the newsrooms are going to shrink to some of these ridiculous sizes that we're seeing at the moment, and you can't produce credible news with a handful of people. Thandeka, I would imagine also part of it is that, back in the day, as much as we thought we had diverse media, in comparison, they were probably monopolies, really, weren't they? And so you were almost guaranteed to stay in business because you could only advertise on the SABC. You could only advertise mostly in Naspers. Yes. What has happened throughout the world is that this old type of print, this kind of business model that started with the printing press is over. It's really a model in decline, and it's been disrupted by the digital era. And increasingly, old traditional media and its habits and its routines and processes are having to evolve to meet the digital era, and we are having to rethink this whole thing. But the interesting thing is that it's going to have an effect on democracy, because media, and especially where you have a plurality of media voices and a certain degree of media freedom, is a democracy propeller. It's one of those institutions that are vital to modern democracies. So when we see a whittling down in institutional capacity in the media, it is of concern to us, because we then have to worry about the quality of democracy and about freedom of speech in that society. Now, interestingly, in Europe, they have done interesting things. Whereas, as Alan was saying, that advertising has gone to Facebook, to Google, to all these online and new
huge, massive, gigantic companies. These companies tend not to pay tax in a number of jurisdictions.
Right.
Like here at home, they don't pay tax. So in Europe, they've been clawing back a degree of state revenue from these companies, and perhaps we could consider doing that and plowing it back into those media houses like public media or the MDDA that we have decided are important to democracy, and community media, which is important to democracy, and to keeping that, and perhaps claw back for the public broadcaster as well. I'm also concerned about, sorry Alan, I'm also concerned about the purchasing of one of the largest media houses, the house that produces the Sunday Times and the Sunday World, which has been reeled out to a new buyer now, and the Financial Mail, the Business Day, and so on and so forth. It's a huge media house, and it's an important one, and it has added to the plurality of voices, problems notwithstanding. Now, the guys who've bought it are guys that have been associated with some of the scandals around capture. So I'm
think
concerned
that it could
about
be a vehicle to change the narratives.
To change narratives, to speak about the South African story in a different way. That's if they become the kind of media owners who breathe onto the journalists and to the editors and so on. And if they are as heavy-handed as they have been in the past. I know one of them was very heavy-handed with me, even trying to call security on me. So I really
but I think
I fear.
The public are not stupid though. I mean, they can make up their minds, can't they? I mean, and also these aren't the only sources now. I think sometimes we overestimate the influence that newspapers still have. I would think some influencers on Twitter have got more followers than people buying newspapers. So maybe are we not overcooking this?
Yes and no. I mean, I think no in the sense that I think public discussion does need to be mediated or orchestrated in some way. I mean, the problem with online Twitter discussions in that they're seldom very constructive. So I think you do need a sense of a media that works according to professional codes.
People can trust. All right, so you talked about journalists feeling vulnerable. Right. Is it changing their behavior and how they do their work?
Well, I mean, I can only assume, but in terms of retrenchments, I would say so. I mean, there's a different vulnerability about safety we talk about, but I mean, it occurs to me, for instance, with the SABC proposed retrenchments, where our author, sort of pointed out that 300 of those are specifically coming from the news department, news division. So how do those journalists feel? I mean, this is a very uncertain time, and there's an issue of governance and journalist security, and security means a security of mind and place and professionalism. And how can you do a good job if you're feeling unstable and insecure? Because it's a very demanding, good journalism is very demanding, emotionally, psychologically, etc., on your family life and so on. And so you need some kind of security from your employers in order to do a good job.
And also I would imagine, Thandeka, that people, if you're worried about retrenchments, the kind of journalism that you do, you play it safe most of the time because you think, my boss is in with this lot, I can't write or do something about that story just in case I get the chop.
It increases the chance of self-censorship and perhaps makes you more vulnerable to thinking about brown envelopes and things like that, which really are devastating for journalism and ethics.
So what is the state of the newsroom generally for you? Is it getting worse? Is it something that can be fixed? Or is it one of those things, as Thandeka was pointing to actually, is it actually we're just getting a wake-up call that, you're thinking in old ways, to survive, you must do different things?
I think, I think that's true. I mean, there are a lot of fresh ideas, basically, that are appearing. So the Daily Vox, we had him speaking at our panel when we launched it, the editor, and he's a lot more optimistic about the spaces that are opening up through this kind of these shifts and changes, right? The newsroom itself, I don't know. There's also a trend now. Rian Wilmerans was saying to produce content that actually is credible, particularly if you put it behind paywalls. Suddenly, people are paying and they want good quality content. As well as some new sites, some new websites, like I understand, the New Frame, for example, they are specifically trying to do good journalism with good sub-editing, etc. So that is a kind of a positive backlash that is happening. So, I think we're going to have a mixture of a continuing decline with some stronger projects starting up and newsrooms starting up.
Right, and Thandeka, final thought, because you've been at this game a long time, you've worked in print and electronic media. What have you seen change over time, just from being in it?
Peter, I've been reading extensively about what's happening to the media industry globally, and I come away with two very strong ideas. The first is that each country needs to, its community of journalists and media owners and the state and parliament need to think about industry redesign if they are very serious about the quality of democracy. So those clawbacks from the big international conglomerates are a serious thing that we need to do, and we need to decide what we need to save in the interests of the national conversation and the quality of that conversation. And we need to save public broadcasting earnestly in the interests of those people in the rural reaches who depend on this. They have a right to know, and they may not be able to pay to know. So the user pay model needs to be seriously reinvestigated. Now, he talked about New Frame. New Frame is part of what's happening globally, that it is journalism and information and discourses that are helpful in unpacking a rapidly unfolding world that are beginning to become very popular with people. People are paying for that kind of journalism and that kind of content.
Okay, interesting. I mean, we could chat about this for hours, but we're going to have to move on to something else, and we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by an international editor in Malawi to talk about what's on the front pages there, and also we'll be looking at the Sunday papers here, and an interesting thought about corporate influence, one of the papers. Find out what I mean after this.
SABC is the official broadcaster of AFCON 2019, Africa's beautiful story.
On Full View, the end of the day means unpacking the day's events. We recap all major news stories from around the world.
The African Union's decision to suspend Sudan's membership was made by the AU Peace and Security Council.
It was a unanimous decision. We said we'll give them up to 60 days.
And have in-depth discussions on what's happening in our country.
This economy, for it to grow, you need people that will be working in order for them to be able to have the buying power.
Mbaletsile Mthethwa joins us now live. MNS attorneys were mandated to conduct these reports and investigations. What sort of processes did they follow?
We heard Tiamo explaining that they worked with actuarial scientists in order to investigate these transactions.
Slap suits, tell us more about this.
The concept of slap suits, which is litigation often used by big companies to silence critics.
We as civil society won't stand for this kind of intimidation and harassment. If you come to South Africa, you need to obey the obligations that you have in terms of the laws of this country, including environmental laws.
Hello, I'm Nana, and I want to tell you a bit about Economics Unbound. It is a live studio current affairs program that brings an understanding of the economy, how it operates, and how it is managed. The show seeks to include ordinary South Africans in purposeful and well-informed discussions about the economy.
For you to be in business, you need to work with other businesses,
while providing them with enough information to make better economic and financial decisions.
Bringing informal sectors into a formal economy and making it more inclusive.
Any business opportunity that is below 1 million must be given to a township entrepreneurship.
Through this program, audiences can look forward to 30 minutes of deep and tough questioning on the issues of the week.
To whom does women's unpaid work go?
Welcome back. It's time now on Media Monitor to look at the papers, and we start with an international view somewhere on the continent. And today we go to Malawi, where we're joined on the line by journalist Gertrude Abdu Kandawire. Gertrude, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you and good morning.
All right, Gertrude. So I would imagine that the May 21 elections are still making the front pages of the newspapers by and large because it's so contested.
You're actually quite right. It's one of the major topics as of now. Every newspaper, every single day has an article featuring some feedback as well as some development on the May 21st elections. As you can see, we have the Nation newspaper with you, and this was from a Friday, 28th of June, and they were giving us feedback as well as updates on the proceedings that took place on Thursday at the High Court that is sitting as a constitutional court in Lilongwe, that is Malawi's capital, as well as the weekend newspaper of the Daily Times. Keep in mind, these are two of the major newspapers in the country, and it reads as the United Nations Development Program has also been dragged into the court case. So as you can see, it's building up a lot of tension as more and more stakeholders are being dragged into this entire case that is being developed from the court that took place on the 21st of May. Peter, people are still a bit tense. The nation is still a bit tense. We're still trying to find out exactly who the original winner for the May 21st tripartite election is. And people are still asking a lot of questions. Now, as you can see in the Daily Times newspaper, where it says that the UNDP has been dragged into court, this was also findings from a Thursday's sitting at the High Court, where it's sitting as a constitutional court. And as you know, as of now, we have a 5 High Court judge panel. So all these judges are taking a look at exactly what took place with the May 21st elections. And we can see that there's a lot of stakeholders being dragged in. Recently, the UNDP has been dragged in. Apparently, some of the auditors that were under the UNDP were being controlled by the MEC supervisors. And apparently the court has said that it was not supposed to be done as so. Hence why UNDP has now been dragged, and they want the auditors, as well as they want to find out exactly which auditor was at which polling station on the 21st of May. So all of these rulings we'll definitely find out more as we draw closer to the 29th of July. This is when they'll be sitting again to actually give us a verdict and more hearing for the matters.
All right. What else is in the news in Malawi at this stage?
All right, as of now, we're taking a look at something pretty interesting. This is, a few years ago, I carried out a similar story on the increase on suicide cases. Now, the reason why this issue is major as well as sensitive in our country, Malawi, most people do not really believe and engage themselves into therapy. Okay? So we've seen an increase of suicide cases, and this is coming in from The Nation on Sunday. This is a newspaper that was officially released today, and it has said that there has been 128 deaths in the recent 9 months that we're coming from, and only 4% are women. Now, if you can see, Malawi is a very male-dominated country, and a male is seen as somebody that has to be strong. So you see that people are raised up in such a way that they cannot express themselves, they cannot communicate. And as of this, we have seen that there is an increase of males actually committing suicide. And this is coming in from Dr. Bandawe. He's one of the doctors that look into mental health in the country, one of the specialists actually. And it's an alarm. It's an alarm because considering that our country already has more females than males, and then we're in a situation where males cannot fully express themselves because of society and communities. So this has come up as an alarm. It's something that is still increasing, and it's very quite unfortunate. So that is something coming in from Nation on Sunday.
All right, perhaps in wrapping up, we've been discussing the state of the newsroom here in South Africa, and I'm just wondering what the situation is like for you in Malawi. We know that sometimes newsrooms across the continent can be under tremendous pressure, particularly from government. What's the situation in Malawi at the moment? Are you free to report, or are you always conscious and aware that maybe there might be some pressures that might come your way if you are perhaps critical of certain people and certain institutions?
I can say it's a 50-50 thing. I wouldn't want to say that the government controls the media, but then it's a 50-50 thing. The only sad thing is that when it comes to news reporting, as a news writer, as a journalist, you can come up with a creative story and then send it through to your editors. And then you'll end up finding out that some of your editors are connected to government and they may be working underground schemes with the government that you can't release stories that are negative towards government, despite the stories being true and accurate. So I find that your story is being offshed with most of the facts and just being left as a regular story, you know. So they usually have this very strict boundary as to what you report with the government, because government controls everything. And with the editors, most of the editors are connected to governmental officials, meaning that despite you wanting to report the truth and the facts, you'll still be limited in some way. So the newsroom, I feel personally, I don't know what other people's views are, I feel personally that it is being tampered, and it is something that me and my colleagues also, just a few weeks ago, were talking about the same. And so how will journalism or the newsroom ever be free and fair if the people on top will always be oppressing the facts and the stories that need to be on ground? You know, so people are becoming a little bit more scared of reporting facts. We've heard in the past that journalists have been killed for some reason for reporting facts and truth that have put some top officials in some hot seats. So people are a bit cautious, but then I feel it's still a 50-50 thing. Yes, government can come and scare you, but if you really want the truth out, you can just stand up and say, hey, journalism is supposed to be fair and fair, and people are supposed to know the truth, eh?
All right, Gertrude, we're going to have to leave it there, but thanks so much indeed for your update and a look at what's happening in Malawi. Sikomo Kwambiri, thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Good day.
Bye-bye. All right, let's come back home now and talk about what's on the front pages of our papers here. Any headline that grabbed your attention? Let me start with you this time, Evan.
Well, the world's most dangerous city
and that's the Sunday Times.
The Sunday Times jumped out at me the most.
Yeah.
And the City Press I found quite interesting. Yeah. Well, the world's most dangerous city, my thought was, really? I mean, so I think the headline's a bit of a sensational splash, but a bit interesting article anyway.
But 1,280 people killed in 4 months. That is a lot.
That is a lot,
isn't it? Yeah. Or I don't know. I mean, I was watching the news last night, and a woman got stabbed in South London. Pregnant woman died. So there is these kinds of things. But I suppose our murder rate, really, generally, is enormous. And then when you've got gangs, it just escalates things, doesn't it? Yeah. All right. So, City Press, another one. Cyril gears up for war with Advocate Mkhwebane. How do you see this story, Thandeka?
I think it must be a very difficult fine line to travel for a new president, for the new president, because he has to respect the institution of the public protector, and he has to, he's required by law to honor all the requirements and go through a rigorous hearing process because he's not above the law. But at the same time, the advocates' rulings have been so often quashed by the courts on review that it's really worrying. But it's unfortunate to be in a spat with a public protector.
Yeah. So how does this play out?
How does it play out?
Yeah, because he's caught between a rock and a hard place, and then Parliament is going to have to decide the future of this woman, and it might be seen that they're getting rid of her to deal with the Ramaphosa affair.
Yeah. Well, on the media side, I was quite interested in why the City Press ran that with as their lead story, because it is a story, it is an unfolding story, but I didn't see anything new necessarily being added to what had been reported during the week. So
So this could be this influence that's coming through.
Could be. Yeah.
All right, so ANC plot to destroy ATM, that's the Sunday Independent. And what's interesting for me is that just last week, the other side of that story was Magashule was part of this plot to set up ATM. Is it coincidental that this story is now coming up, that people within the ANC were working hard to destroy the ATM? Is it coincidental? Is it, what do you think? It's a hard one, isn't it?
I think it's Byzantine,
yes.
so complicated.
Yeah.
But it's also equally very juicy and salacious, and there are allegations of 3-hour-long recordings of people setting people up using money. And it made me think of how toxic money has become in our politics.
Yeah.
I mean, your point about the stories these days are complicated, not just in the stories, but in terms of understanding the players involved. So,
Sunday Independent, I'd like to put that up at the moment, and I'm going to ask that question again. So, Iqbal Survey, we know, I don't know if they've sold the paper yet, but so there's this story, Sekunjalo applauds another BEE player, and I wonder if this would have made a front page had the owner not be the subject of the story. Is this the kind of influence that we're talking about?
I think so. I mean, what's it about? It's about Sekunjalo applauding another. Is that a news story? It's a PR piece,
right?
Very clearly, and that doesn't belong on the front page of newspapers. No.
And this is your fear, that if this next group of people take over this group, we might see more influential stories being written.
Story or no story, that was a predictable front page headline for The Independent.
Right, right. What makes you say that?
That's how they roll now.
All right, okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to start wrapping things up and starting looking at the week ahead, what might be on the front pages of our newspapers. I suspect state capture inquiry as we get into the month of July. A former number one citizen is going to be appearing. Stay with us.
Story. My child, I have a great story to tell you. Although we come from humble beginnings, we've done legendary things.
South Africa have won the 1996 African Cup of Nations.
Our lands are full of wonders. Even though sometimes things don't go our way, we find inner strength to persevere and push forward. We dress up for the occasion. Oh, how we love to dance and sing. We've seen our fair share of victories and disappointments. But we thrive when we are together. And that, my dear child, is the beautiful story of Africa.
SABC is the official broadcaster of AFCON 2019, Africa's beautiful story.
All right, welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. We're starting to wrap things up now, but what I'm going to ask my guest editors today is to tell us what stories they think will probably be making news during the course of the week ahead. Let's start with you, Alan. What do you think?
Well, I like the Cyril Ramaphosa story. I think that's going to have, obviously, will have a few legs. We're waiting for his kind of formal response in terms of proving the situation. So that, I think, will be quite an interesting story to follow.
State capture.
State capture, yes.
That's always worth a good run. Tandeka?
I agree with Alan. State capture and the Cyril Ramaphosa versus Mkhwebana drama. I also think that this ATM story is going to get even more explosive and convoluted. But I will be inviting in the people from the latest scenario planning. I don't know whether it's a workshop or so they put together. It's academics, a number of businesses and civil society and some concerned South Africans got together to really rigorously interrogate the figures, the data, the growth figures and so on, and ask which scenarios are most likely to be the future of South Africa. So they've got nice catchy words for the different scenarios, like the preferable one I understand is called Nile Walk. And the other scenarios, the doomsday ones, have also equally grisly names. But what is interesting about it is that they are trying to say South Africans must have a conversation about where they choose to be over the next few years and how they choose to define themselves. Because these things are a matter of choice. Policy is a choice. How we act as citizens is a choice, and so on and so forth.
Well, let's all come together, make the right choices. Thanks so much indeed for being great guests and great guest editors. Thanks so much for your input.
Thank you.
And you at home, thanks so much indeed for joining us and watching Media Monitor. Join us again next week at the same time. In the meantime, have a great one, everybody. Bye-bye.